Hi friends, so Circular Hoof talking to famous people, doing another regular cognitive function video here. This time because Val Kyrie here is smart. You'll see she said, love the ending song, and I don't know what else she said. But she had asked me to make a video about INFJ INFP compatibility. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. Remind me if I forget. Instead of waiting to remind me when I forgot, she's something smart. She commented saying, not mentioning the former thing, but reminding me of her anyway, and doing so in a way that I'm gonna like, because I love when people like my music, comment on it. So that's pretty clever there, lady. You're a clever lady, yes you are. Clever, clever lady, drive your car. Okay, so let's see here. INFJ plus INFP equals. Well, the answer is bum, 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 bum. Sad face. Okay. So here we go. The base function of the INFJ is NI. The base function of the INFP is FI. The tool function of INFJ is FE. The tool function of INFP is NE. This might be called your path of strength. In other words, when situations and environments are conducive to you using these functions, then you're happy. You're like, right on, this is easy. I'm badass. I'm so great because this is consistent with what I want it to be. All right, so the strong conscious block of each type complements in terms of delegation, but contradicts in terms of values. INFJ's ignoring NE assumes possibility generation will take care of itself. So the INFP tool function resonates comfortably with INFJ's base in the moment. In other words, INFP is coming up with possibilities, and it's INFJ's nature to go good possibility, bad possibility, best possibility, etc. That's consistent and comfortable for each other. And in the social expression of self, though, in the social expression of self, INFP wrestles to render the complexity of emotional self into abstract meaning by producing possible expressions with their NE, none of which alone seems adequate to actually express the complexity of the FI that's their dominant nature. Meanwhile, the INFJ validates and invalidates the possible expressions as consistent or inconsistent with NI renderings of the INFP's character self. In other words, the INFJ understands the INFP to be a certain person and looks to these words that the INFP says as possibilities and validates against their own NI understanding of who that person is. INFP appreciates this as they see it as a validation of their process of generating possible expressions of their emotional self. Concurrently, the INFJ experiences the INFP's process as a validation of the INFJ's. However, the instrumental and absolute values will turn out to ultimately conflict irresolvably, and that's where the trouble will be. So if both parties are able to find common ground where they're using their path of strength, which is going to involve talking about each other's feelings and stuff, they're going to feel like, wow, this is really compatible. Well, we get along so well. Well, don't get your hopes up. That's a little bit deceptive. Okay, so let me go down here like this. In the second part, which might be called path of weakness, you've got your agenda function and your seeking function. For INFJ, the agenda function is TI, and the seeking function is SE. For INFP, the agenda function is SI, the seeking function is TE. In the weak conscious block, the axis mates of the strong conscious block fulfill their unavoidable roles. The TI that INFJ uses as a meta-criterion is the value of the character self that the social self must validate against. In other words, as INFJ is expressing himself in the moment, the social self, he validates against his existing NI understood narratives about himself as a being, and they have to be consistent. So if the INFJ understands himself to be smart, for example, he's going to need the realities of the character self, of the social self, to be consistent with his um, understanding of how that validates for a character self. So it's very metaphysical. INFJ is, well, one might express the INFJ as four elements: mechanism, habitually using social slash emotional certainty, to, that is, say, FE, to attain consistency with the instrumental goal of absolute exclusionary certainty, that is to say, their NI, to validate against an absolute goal of relative conditional certainty, that is, say, TI. So all these things are metaphysical approximations. That's where they get their certainty from. These elements imply the fourth, which seeks another to provide the INFJ's character self to the INFJ's animal self through physical, externally attending action. In other words, in order for this all stuff to link back to the self, they need to have the physical SE manifestation of self provided to them, or an ecosystem conducive to that provided to them by their dual. INFP, in contrast, uses a mechanism of social experience, uncertain emotional, to shape, direct, and express an instrumental goal of creativity, that's their NE, to validate against an absolute goal of predictability. Did I do that backwards? I think I did. No, yeah, this is wrong. This should be here. Is a mechanism of creativity to validate, like this. I had that backwards. It's a mechanism of creativity to shape, direct, and express an instrumental goal of social experience or authenticity to validate against an absolute goal of predictability. These elements imply the seeking of INFP, who wants another to pairing to the who wants another to provide a paring down of the foregoing into an effectiveness-minded order of operations. Okay, so basically, that's how you describe these two, and you'll see that the mechanisms, instrumental goals, absolute goals, and seeking goals are not consistent with each other. The mechanism of each is, one is interface and one is action. Action is different than interface in the sense that NE produces ideas, and while it may take something out here and produce ideas off of that, it's not exactly designed to go back and forth. For example, Audra and I both wanted to run with this idea the other night about a scene where president is brought this fancy pen in a box, and it turns out it's got one of those red, white, and blue popsicles on the end of it. And he acts as though nothing's unusual and signs it. Anyway, we both wanted to be the one doing the NE. It wasn't interactive, although our FBTI would draw, we did interact, but ultimately the NE itself didn't want to listen to the other person. It wanted to put. Okay, so the thing is, the mechanism of creativity to shape, direct, and express an instrumental goal of social experience, in other words, emotional experience, to validate against an absolute goal of predictability. So creative emotionality, when expressed best, it allows the INFP to understand the world in predictable ways. They therefore need somebody else to come in and say, well, here's the order of operations by which predictability is attained. And that's the TE seeking. So now let's look at how this stuff plays out by looking at the back end of the stack. The path of development here is the part of you that will develop whether you want it to or not you'll get better at it. You don't have to try. It doesn't require any will. It's the easy part of the back end of the stack, basically. So the ignoring is NE for INFJ and FI for its constraint function. FE is ignoring for INFP, NI is constraint function for INFP. You might call this counter value, but I call it constraint because it's the thing you know how to do that forces you to not just rely on your most comfortable things. It's like you understand how to do it, but it interferes with that which is more comfortable. So it constrains you when you know how and when you have to do it, and it helps you to express your tool function more completely. It's a part of the tool doing process you don't like. Everyone, in your job, you've got a couple things you got to do. Some you like, some you don't. It's the part you don't like, but you're good at it anyway. And so I'd call it here the constraint function. The development block of each is structured such that much conflict ensues. When the coupling is working right, it's ignoring the big picture value conflicts in favor of the illusion of mutual validation. That's if they're just dealing with their path of strength. When the INFP fluid base function precludes INFJ from effectively using their social certainty tool function, it requires them to utilize a countervalued constraining function. In other words, it turns out INFJ's continual NIFE certaintification of things isn't working because INFP isn't staying certain. They aren't staying put. They aren't staying boxed, which means then they got to use their FI. Okay, let me pay attention to their authentic feelings in the moment. But INFJ ultimately will attempt to solve that, to define it and render it into something they understand as objectively so rather than authentically unrenderable into metaphysics. So, this means INFJ accepting that INFP will never stay put, will never express the self in a currency that naturally spends in the INFJ economy. The FI of INFP ultimately ignores INFJ's work entirely while appearing to respond to it, which can be very frustrating, I'm sure, for INFJ. Concurrently, INFP's habitual efforts riff off the finality, both social and logical, that INFJ's nature continually establishes, instrumentally, rendering a new, unclapped set of potentialities for the INFJ to then resolve. When the INFJ realizes that there's no end to this, that the purposes run afoul of each other on the character self's metrics, INFJ disengages and starts faking stuff. And that's the beginning of the end for a healthy relationship between these two, but they might stay together forever, as Corey and Liz, my friends who are Corey's an INFJ, Liz is an INFP, they're apparently staying together forever, despite the fact that it's an awful, awful relationship. Okay, so path of optimization, this is where you have to do the work. You have to be willful about it. Optimal functioning requires one to develop in these areas, but development doesn't happen on its own, as it does with the development path. One must willfully attain. Let me do this. Pow, pow, center, 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 pow. There we go. Okay, so optimal functioning requires one develop in these areas, but development doesn't happen on its own. One must willfully attain balance by enabling expression of self through these modalities in ways that complement rather than conflict with habitually favored manners of attention. In other words, you've got to decide to improve yourself, become optimal, or find yourself in an environment like talking to famous people that basically does this. It says, here's where you need to optimize. Not exactly expressly, but sort of expressly. Regardless, it's what the environment does. So the problem here is obvious. INFJ seeks SE. INFP doesn't get what they want and can't basically provide it. Why? It's their polar. INFJ validates ultimately against TI. INFP can use TI well, but ultimately sees using it to validate as an evil prioritization of approximations over authentic experience. INFP seeks TE. INFJ doesn't get what they want and won't ever provide it. INFP validates against SI. INFJ ultimately sees SI as an evil manner of knowing that is incommunicably and selfishly limited to the experiential knowledge specific to the individual knowing it. So, much tears and sobbings and sorrows ensue. And that's why INFJ and INFP should not become a romantic couple. If you are currently in an INFJ INFP relationship, I strongly, strongly urge you to walk right up to your partner and say, I divorce thee. Thee shall never cross my path again. We are done forevermore. Goodbye. Stop trying to kiss me. Okay? And instead, seek your duals. I'm not absolutely convinced duality works outside of Alpha Quadra, but I bet it does. It seems like logically it would. So anyway, that's my video. Thanks, lady, for asking the question and doing your little trick there. You're probably the INFJ to pull off that trick, but could be a clever INFP. We do have good ideas with our NE users do, you among them. So that's possible. Bye.